Let's start working on our final part of the animation, which will be the 3D Godrays. This is done by using the VolumeFog, a tool that I adore and is very powerful. While this does create a 3D volume, it is actually a 2D node. It gets its 3D data in two ways, by giving it access to a 3D scene and most importantly another extra output channel called world position path. But we can't, or better won't, use the R3D base for this, since we can only generate world position path data where we have an object. This is why we will create a third 3D scene exclusively for our VolumeFog. We start by taking a shape 3D and change the shape to a sphere. We will increase the radius, so we always stay inside of the sphere. Again, we will add in another merge 3D and merge our camera into it. Now we have our camera moving inside of our sphere. Next, we need another render 3D and rename this to something like R3D volume. Right now we only output a fully white image, so in output channels activate world position. If we look at this channel in the viewer, we can see that Fusion is putting out weird colors. Those are telling Fusion where each pixel is located in 3D space. And again, for this you want to be on the safe side and set the render 3D node to 32-bit if it isn't already. Now we add a VolumeFog node after our R3D volume and I greet it with the same white image as before. This is because we are compositing a white volume onto a white image. Let's head to the color tab of our VolumeFog and check fog only. If we change the color, we can see that there is already something happening. If we go into the noise tab and increase the detail, we can see that now we have added a 3D noise to our volume. If we play this, we can see that it's already moving, but this will not line up to our camera yet. This is because if we go into the camera tab, we see that it has created a new camera at the origin inside of the VolumeFog. And this is why we have a 3D scene input at our VolumeFog. We pipe our merge 3D into the pinkish 3D scene input, and now we have the correct camera movement. And our VolumeFog camera is set to default, which will automatically select the first and in our case only camera in the scene. The volumes in Fusion don't work with voxels like other 3D applications do, meaning we won't be able to directly import VDBs for example, but this isn't something you need to worry or know about to actually use it. It rather works by stacking many planes of images in front of each other and treating them like 3D volumes. And this allows something very powerful, creating volumes out of image sequences. Let's do just that by piping in our initial animation from the channel boolean clear node into the fog image. In my case, the VolumeFog will print an error. This is simply because my Fusion composition starts at frame 1, but the VolumeFog wants to start at frame 0. I will quickly change this to 1. But still nothing. This is because the VolumeFog is not animated by default. The first slice time is the first frame it uses to create the volume, and the Z slices are the number of frames it uses to generate the volume. So, if we change the amount of Z slices to, for example, 300, we will essentially look into the future, which is something we don't want. But as you can see, now we can clearly make out the slices. And this can get quite memory intensive. So before changing anything else, we should add in a Resize node between our channel boolean clear and the VolumeFog. You can press Shift to drag the Resize node in between. We can resize this to 250 by 250, which will be enough resolution for the Godray. Back on the VolumeFog, we only wanted to use one frame, so we can change Z-slices to 1. And we want to animate this. For this, we'll use another expression on our first time slice. So hit expression and type in time. Now we can see that our VolumeFog is rebuilt each frame using our current animation. We want to increase the samples. which are the amount of slices it generates. For now, I'm changing this to 128. We can merge this to our animation by dragging and dropping the output of our VolumeFog onto our animation with particles. I will add in a color corrector so we can more easily see what's happening. As you can see, our VolumeFog goes behind our animation. This is because by default, the volume is being generated in the origin with a size of 1 by 1, meaning a length of 0.5 will go into the negative z-space and another in the positive z-space. On our VolumeFog, we go into the Shape tab and could theoretically move it in z by hand, but we want to keep this as procedural as possible by using another simple expression. We will open the scale parameters and uncheck log x, y, z to get individual scale controls. Now we will open the expression field on the z offset and drag and drop the whip to the z scale and divide that by 2. Now this sits perfectly where we want it, although it seems to be slightly too big. But this is only because our already very small resolution of 250 by 250 is scaled down even more. While the noise on our volume does look nice and quite realistic, I want many streaky lines instead. For that, we will go into the Noise tab of our VolumeFog and unlock the XYZ scale for our noise. For streaky lines, we don't want much noise in Z, so we will increase the Z scale to something high like 30. And we can decrease X and Y scale. Due to the amount of detail we have added, the slices are becoming visible again, so we need to increase our samples. In my case, this is 253. I also want to decrease the length by decreasing the Z-scale on the Shape tab. Thanks to our expression, the volume still fits perfectly to our animation. By increasing the soft edge, we can get rid of some of these harsh edges. Now we are pretty much done and only need to make some minor changes to get the look that we want. And as with everything, change the parameters just as you like. I will start by adding a soft glow after the vector motion blur. I'll increase the threshold so that not every particle will glow, and decrease the gain and increase the glow size. I'll do the same to our base animation, but keep the settings on default there. You might be wondering if we should add some motion blur to the base of our animation. Our camera movement isn't that strong, so the effect won't be too visible, but there's still something that we can learn by doing it. So we add in a vector motion blur after our R3D base and activate the vector path there as well. If you remember, when we added motion blur to the particles, I talked about artifacts that could occur because of anti-aliasing. So if we look at our vector path, you can see that we are generating vector animation only where our image plane is visible. Usually this is exactly what we want, but in this case we wouldn't mind getting this information on the whole image plane, which is a square right now even though we can't see it. This would mean we don't have to worry about visible pixels on the edges of our animation not being affected due to aliasing. We can do that easily by going into our image plane 3D and under Visibility uncheck Suppress Auxiliary Channels for transparent pixels. There we go. Possible problems avoided, and let's go back to our RGB image. For another minor tweak, I will animate the opacity or blend of the volume because I feel like it should fade out. I will go to the merge node that adds the volume to our animation, go to frame 200 and set a keyframe at blend. Then I go to frame 265 and decrease the amount. Actually, I think this is too much overall, so I jump back to frame 200 and decrease the blend as well. Next, I will add in a slight blur after our volume, just so our streaky lines aren't as harsh and become slightly smoother. The last step before rendering is to add in a background, if we don't want any transparency in our final render. I'll do that by creating a black background node and merge our animation on top of this black background. The last step would be to add in a saver or media out node and render this out. Before rendering, I increase the amount of particles being born and decrease their size accordingly. And play around with these numbers and make this your own. With just a few changes to the setup, you can create all kinds of effects, like this text reveal I showed before. Feel free to ask if you don't know how. I hope you have learned something, and I will see you next time.